Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the House of Commons passed Bill C-234. Normally that's not a remarkable statement, but it bears repeating for comprehension. The House of Commons, made up of 338 elected members of Parliament to democratically legislate the laws of Canada, passed Bill C-234. This bill was a private member's bill to remove the carbon tax from farmers so that the thousands of dollars in unrebated carbon taxes that every farmer pays will no longer have to be built into the price of food. During a crisis of food affordability and food inflation, this is a common sense way to do something immediate and concrete to help farmers produce affordable food for Canadians. The elected members of Parliament passed this bill over the objection of the governing Liberals. It was sent to the Senate, where the same legislative process takes place, but during this process, and at the clear and obvious behest of the Prime Minister and his government, the Senate gutted the bill by removing heating fuels for barns from the bill. They wanted to kill the bill altogether, but this government's extraordinary lobbying efforts succeeded in gutting the bill by ensuring that the carbon tax still applies to heating buildings like barns. And this adds enormous cost to the production of food, particularly the cost of eggs, chickens, pork, and dairy. Adding the tax on food production, axing the tax on food production would be a simple way to address inflation on food, which continues to rise even faster than the general rate of inflation, and along with the staggering cost of rent and mortgage payments, puts the greatest pressure on the most vulnerable Canadians, people whose entire family budgets can't cover the cost of food and shelter. So I asked the government that following a desperate weekend of panic-stricken phone calls, which resulted in the Senate gutting the bill, will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and take the carbon tax off farmers, First Nations, and families who want to heat their homes? And I mentioned First Nations in my question because First Nations are challenging the federal government's authority to impose the carbon tax on them. And I mentioned farmers who are price takers, who only have so much room to pass on higher costs without simply having to shut down production. And consumers have to pay more for food. So the response was an insipid mix of unrelated nonsense talking points. And since that time, their House leader has falsely tried to blame the pathetically really, tried to blame the Conservatives for the failure of 234 from passing this House again, ignoring the entire reason or pretending not to know why this bill is back here in the first place. It's here because their senators are doing the bidding of the Prime Minister that appointed them and gutting the bill. The Conservative Deputy Whip offered to pass the bill by unanimous consent in its original form, but it was the Liberals that refused to do that. So I asked them again, will they respect the will of this elected House? Will they recognize the role that the Prime Minister played and his ministers in begging and bullying senators into rejecting a bill passed by the elected members of this chamber? Will they realize that an overwhelming number of Canadians, including most provincial and territorial premiers, that the carbon tax is punishing people who just want to eat, heat, and transport themselves? Do they not see that when you make a basic input like energy more expensive, you reduce output, which leads to higher prices? And if they won't axe the carbon tax altogether, will they at least agree to axe it on farmers so they can bring down the price of groceries?
L'Honorable Secrétaire parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Et du développement social.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to explain to the Honourable Member of Calgary-Rocky Ridge that putting a price on pollution is at the centre of our government's plan to fight climate change and curb the devastating effects on our communities and economy. Monsieur le Président, les conséquences...
Mr. Speaker, the negative consequences of climate change are very real. Canadians have not forgotten the devastating forest fires last year that burned large tracts of land in Canada and left smoke in the air. We can't sit by idly instead of coming up with solutions to deal with climate change. Doing nothing is unacceptable. We need to take action. We need to take action on behalf of Canadians today and future generations, our children and our grandkids.
Steps that will have effective, concrete impacts. And a vital part of this plan is Canada's price on pollution. Pollution has a cost. It has a cost to Canadians, to communities, to our health, and to our economy. Applying a price on carbon pollution is widely recognized as one of the most efficient ways to reduce emissions and to fight the devastating effects of climate change. De plus, notre mécanisme.
In addition, our approach to putting a price on pollution is an affordable one. We often hear people here say that the price on pollution is costing Canadians too dearly, but Mr. Speaker, I can assure you that that is quite false. In provinces where the federal price on pollution applies, the lion's share of the revenues are returned to Canadians and lower income people benefit the most.
With the cost of living for a majority of Canadian families, while encouraging choices that will help Canada lower its emissions. Our price on pollution ensures 8 out of 10 households in these provinces are receiving more money back through quarterly Canada carbon rebate payments than they pay. Thanks to our government's pollution price mechanism, a family of 4 living in one of these provinces can receive up to $1,800. As you can see with our plan, we are not only fighting climate change, we are also returning money to Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, the government doesn't keep any of the proceeds of the federal price on pollution. The government gives the money back to households and small businesses, to farmers and Indigenous governments. International experts agree that our price on pollution is an effective way of fighting climate change.
With this approach, we are sending a clear message that pollution has a price. Putting a price on carbon pollution encourages reduction across the economy while giving households and businesses the flexibility to decide when and how to make changes. To achieve this, we need to maintain the price signal that over the long term is necessary for carbon pricing to work and bring emissions down. Removing pollution pricing, as the opposition has called for, will eliminate its powerful incentive to encourage people and businesses to pollute less, to change their behaviors. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, Madam Speaker, so the response is that the government will continue to tax farmers, to apply an input tax on farmers to increase their costs, which inflates and increases the cost of food. They will give then some rebates to some households, which the Parliamentary Budget Officer has clearly stated does not cover the cost to those households of the carbon tax, particularly when you include all of the higher costs that they incur. Not just the carbon tax they see on their heating bill, not just the carbon tax that they see at the pump, but the general inflation of all of the goods that it's applied to. So the farmer doesn't get the rebate to cover these costs. The farmer is either going to cut production, which will raise the price of food, or they have to pass it on and make the food more expensive. Just axe the tax. If you can't do it for everything, at least do it for farmers.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government knows that ensuring sustainability for future generations is paramount. And that's why we're taking action. We're protecting people from the dangers and costs of climate change and ensuring Canada continues to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions.
Not only does our price on pollution help combat climate change, but it is also given more money back directly to many Canadian families at a time when so many need it most. Merci, Monsieur le Président.